I'm Mr. Ramsey, saving Western civilization, one student at a time. In this lecture, we're going to discuss the United States entering the war. And before we do that, I want to touch about a couple of things that I need to probably address a little bit more in detail. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the battles and then how the United States entered the war. Okay? So when World War I started, all the European powers, both the Allies and the Central Powers, thought that they'd be home by Christmas. Okay? And what stops that is the Battle of the Marne. Okay? The Battle of the Marne is very important because of the fact it introduces trench warfare. It stops the German war machine and it puts everything to halt. Moltke has to back up the German troops, and the reason why he does that is because of General Joseph Joffre, who is the French commander. So General Joffre is the French commander. General Moltke is the German commander. General Moltke is trying to implement the von Schlieffen plan, and it fails at the Battle of Marne at September 5th, 1914. And once that happens, there's a race to the sea, which eventually leads to trench warfare, where basically the lines are the same for the next 4 years in the Western Front. And trench warfare includes 2 parallel trenches, roughly 500 miles, that's unbroken from Switzerland all the way to the English Channel or the North Sea. And this trench includes barbed wire, landmines, and in the middle, because you have trench, barbed wire, and then some landmines, and then in the middle of that is called no man's land. And then you have mines, barbed wire, and then the other trench from the opposing army. Okay? So the middle section is called no man's land. And if you read All Quiet on the Western Front, you know exactly, at least the author's interpretation of what trench warfare really meant. Okay? So this all this stalemate happens, at least on the Western Front, because of the Battle of the Marne. Okay? And so because of that, both sides, both the Central Powers and the Allies, try to break the stalemate. Okay? And under the Central Powers, Germany does it several ways. So in 1915, they introduced poison gas, chlorine gas, to break the trench war at the Battle of Ypres. Okay? Then also in 1915, the Germans introduced U-boats, submarines, that they're going to start sinking British, French supplies, so they can starve them out. Okay? Then in 1916, which I didn't talk about in my last lecture, the Germans decided to attack Verdun, which is a historical site that's important both for the French and the Germans, because the Verdun is where they divide the Charlemagne's kingdom, the Frankish kingdom, right, into 3 different groups in 843 AD. So that's where you have the establishment of the French kingdom and also the German kingdom. Okay? And that happens in 843. So the Germans in 1916 decided to attack it, knowing that full well that the French do not want to lose Verdun. Okay? And they were right. But what happens is Henri Philippe Pétain, which is a name that you need to know because of World War II, Pétain defends Verdun, and both sides lose over 500,000 each. And that happens in February of 1916. Okay? And then, because the Germans decided to not do unrestricted submarine warfare in 1915 because of Woodrow Wilson's threat, they backed away from that. So then they decided to break out their navy at the Battle of Jutland in 1916, and that doesn't work because they lose the battle to the British. Okay? So then in 1917, they decide on February 1st, 1917, to go to unrestricted submarine warfare. And that's what brings the Americans into the war. All right? And they also, not only do that, The Germans also send revolutionaries to Russia to overthrow the Tsar, so that they can only have to fight a one-front war, not a two-front war. So those are the things that the Germans do to try to break the stalemate. Introduce poison gas at the Battle of Ypres. Introduce U-boats. Attack Verdun. They try to break out their navy at the Battle of Jutland. They go back to unrestricted submarine warfare. And then they try to detain the Americans, which we'll talk about in just a second. Okay? What do the Allies do? Okay? Well, the Allies in 1914 decided to blockade Germany so that they would starve them to death. Okay? And then in 1915, the Allies they persuade Italy to enter the war. Okay? Then in 1915, to reinforce, to send supplies to Russia, they, under Winston Churchill, do the Gallipoli campaign that was a disaster. Okay? In January 9th, 1916, they just gave up on it. Okay? And then in 1916, at the Battle of Somme, they introduced tanks. And they didn't know exactly how to use them. Okay? But at the Battle of Somme, you have 500,000 German men dying. You have 400,000 British soldiers dying. You have 200,000 French soldiers dying. Okay? And I know those are numbers, okay, that we don't really understand, but it was disastrous. All right? And I'm going to read something from Warren Carroll's 1917 to put this in perspective. Okay? So, General Haig was the commanding officer of the British Expeditionary Force, okay? And they had invited a tank commander. The tank commander was named Barker Carr, and I'm going to read what he has to say, okay? This is in August of 1917, okay? In Flanders, there was a British, and this is from Warren Carroll's book, 1917. In Flanders, there was a British tank officer named Barker Carr. One day in August, Barker Carr was called to the British General Headquarters, well to the rear, to explain this new form of warfare, tank warfare. His lecture on these principles was very well received. Then at lunch, he told the headquarters officers what was really happening at the front. The Passchendaele offensive, he said, was dead as mutton, which is a slang word for like, it's dead as a doornail, right? It's not going to work, okay? So that's what Barker Carr said. A shocked silence fell. Officers at General Haig's headquarters simply did not talk that way. Brigadier General John Davison, Haig's director of operations, called Barker Carr, the tank commander, into his office. John Davison said, "I am very upset by what you had said at lunch, Baker. If it had been some junior officer, it would have mattered so much, but a man of your knowledge and experience had no right to speak as you did." Barker Carr: "You asked me how things really were, and I told you frankly." General John Davison: But what you say is impossible." Barker Carr: "It isn't. Nobody has any idea of the conditions up there." The General: "But they can't be as bad as you make out." The tank commander Barker Carr: "Have you been there yourself?" "No." "Has anyone in OA been up there?" "No." "Well then, if you don't believe me, it would be as well to send someone up there to find out." No one was sent. The killing went on. When in August ended, the British had suffered 75,000 casualties in Flanders and the Germans 50,000. No significant gain whatsoever had been made, but no one would call off the offensive. So that's the type of people we're dealing with. Those are the type of commanders they're dealing. They're sitting back in the back, and they don't even know what's going on the front. They don't know what they're putting their men into. And it's not until later they realize what a disaster these plans are doing. Okay? So, the Allies, like I said earlier, are trying to they're blockading, to break the stalemate, to blockade Germany. They get Italy into the war. They introduce tanks. They try to do the Gallipoli campaign. And then their last card to play is they're going to get the United States involved. And the reason why the United States got involved is two reasons. Number one, in February 1st, 1917, the Germans go back to submarine warfare, which actually sinks 4 merchant ships of American merchant ships. And the second thing is the Zimmermann telegram. And what the Zimmermann telegram says is this. It says that, well, the British intercepted the Zimmermann telegram and they published it. And who Zimmermann is Arthur Zimmermann. He is the foreign minister of the German Empire. And he tells Mexico this. If you fight the United States, if you keep the United States soldiers here, we'll give you back, we'll help win back California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And we'll give it back to you once we defeat the French and the British. As long as you try to fight the Americans. Okay? And when that was published, everyone goes crazy in America. So Woodrow Wilson, because the Germans do this, and they sink 4 American merchant ships, on April 2nd, Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. All right? My next lecture, we'll talk about the revolutionary that Germany sent to Russia to knock the Tsar out of the war. Hope you enjoyed.